Hi, welcome back to class. My name is Miss Barker, and welcome to 7th grade history. Today we will be learning about the Civil War, as well as the food that the soldiers fighting in the Civil War had to eat. The American Civil War was a 4-year war from 1861 to 1865. It was between the northern states and the 11 southern states that broke away from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. So, the North and South had been divided for many years over the issue of slavery. The Southern economy was largely based on cotton, which was grown on large farms called plantations. Enslaved African Americans did most of the work on the plantations. The North had small farms that used paid workers. Neither side wanted the other's ideas to the new states that were being created in the West. The Northerners wanted to stop the spread of slavery. However, the Southerners believed the U.S. government did not have the right to decide whether slavery should be allowed in a state. They feared that the government's next step would be to stop slavery altogether. So the Southerners became upset when Abraham Lincoln was elected U.S. President in 1860. Lincoln belonged to the Republican Party, which opposed slavery. The Southern states decided to withdraw from the United States to protect their right to keep slaves. They formed a government called the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy. Jefferson Davis was the Confederate president. On April 12, 1861, the Civil War began. The Confederate troops captured Fort Sumter from the Union. Afterwards, both sides quickly raised armies. The first major battle was fought on July 21st. About 30,000 Union troops marched toward the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. The Confederates stopped at a stream named Bull Run, near the town of Manassas. The Union troops were forced back to Washington, D.C. The defeat shocked the Union. In February, Union troops under General Ulysses S. Grant captured Confederate forts in western Tennessee. In April, Grant led the Union to victory in the Battle of Shiloh. General Robert E. Lee led the Confederacy to important victories in the East. In August of 1862, his forces won a second battle at Bull Run. Then Lee invaded the North. The Union troops, however, were able to stop the Confederates at Antietam Creek. This was in September. Fast forward to December when Lee's troops defeated the Union Army at Fredericksburg, Virginia. At the beginning of the war, President Lincoln's primary goal was to keep the United States together. Ending slavery was not his main goal. However, that changed after the Battle of Antietam. The Union's victory encouraged Lincoln to issue a statement called the Emancipation Proclamation. This freed all enslaved people in Confederate states. As a result of this, many African Americans joined the Union Army. In May of 1863, Lee defeated Union forces near Chancellorsville, Virginia. Then he again invaded the North. Lee suffered his first big defeat in July at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The Battle of Gettysburg turned the war in favor of the Union. A day later, Grant captured the city of Vicksburg, Mississippi, for the Union. The Union then controlled the entire Mississippi River. In November of 1863, Grant and General William Sherman drove the Confederates out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. In March of 1864, Lincoln rewarded Grant by letting him take charge of all the Union armies. While Grant was fighting in Virginia, Sherman was fighting in Georgia. He captured Atlanta in September before leading his troops on a march to Savannah, which was a port on the Atlantic Ocean. Along the way, they destroyed railroads and supplies, and Sherman captured Savannah in December. Jump ahead to March of 1865. Lee was very short on not only men, but supplies as well. On April 3rd, Grant captured Richmond, the Confederate capital. He accepted Lee's surrender in Appomattox, Virginia, on April 9th. By the end of May, all Confederate armies had surrendered. After the war, the defeated states were gradually allowed back into the United States. The South rebuilt damaged property and changed its economy so it no longer depended on the labor of enslaved people. This period was known as Reconstruction. It lasted until the last U.S. troops left the South in April of 1877. Now, we are going to talk about the food that soldiers ate during the war. The daily rations were given to soldiers uncooked. Food was not high quality and it didn't taste good. The Confederate soldiers didn't receive much food, especially as the war drug on. Since the rations of food had to be taken long distances, they had to rely on food that could be preserved. So the primary ingredients available to the soldiers were salted meat and canned goods. Now, I want you to take a minute and think quietly to yourself about your favorite meal and what makes it your favorite meal. Now, I want you to think about if you were forced to eat your favorite meal for every meal for the rest of your life. Would it still be your favorite? Would the feelings that you once associated with it be the same? Union soldiers received a hard, unsavory cracker-like biscuit called hardtack, while the Confederate soldiers were lucky if they received a good supply of cornmeal. Now imagine eating that for 4 years. During battles and when food was scarce, a Union soldier's primary source of substance often came from hardtack. Now, I want you to think about a food that you absolutely don't like. And you can go ahead and write down your answers. So, salt pork was a stinky kind of blue, extra salty meat with hair, skin, dirt, and other junk left on it. This was a soldier's main supply of protein. Many soldiers ate salt beef only out of necessity. Salt beef was essentially the very worst parts of a cow, including the organs, the neck, and the shanks. Soldiers were also given rice, potatoes, onions, molasses, and other non-perishable or slow-to-perish items. Soldiers were given food rations and 3-day allotments before a march or battle. They cooked their raw food so they could carry it with them. A canvas haversack with a removable lining was used to carry food on the move. Alrighty, so thank you for listening. That is the end of today's lesson. I have posted an end of the lesson assessment for you guys that you can go ahead and fill out now. Um, I'll give you time to work on that. So if you need, you can rewatch the recording to help you fill out any of the questions. And also feel free to email me with any questions that you have, and there will also be an opportunity for questions when we come back to class on Monday. So thank you.